Torah portion read in synagogues across the world and in Jewish homes every week on Shabbat. Just a small disclaimer as always, my name is Zohar. I'm a Jewish person of Orthodox observance. I'm not a rabbi. Should one need a rabbi, we'll be glad to direct him or her to a rabbi that we follow, and also can be found in the description below, as well as other details and information about Judaism in general and how we follow Judaism. This week's Torah portion is called Parashat Mishpatim. Mishpatim means the laws or ordinances. Okay, and it starts in Sefer Shemot Perek Chaf Aleph Pasuk Aleph until Perek Chaf Daled Pasuk Yud Chet. In English, it's found in the book of Exodus, chapter 21, verse 1, until chapter 24, verse 18. The juxtaposition of this sidra, this portion, dealing with primarily civil and tort law, with the Ten Commandments and the laws of the altar, provided a startling insight into Judaism. To God, there is no realm of religion in the colloquial sense of the word. Most people think of religion as a matter of ritual and spirituality. Western man differentiates between church and state. The Torah knows no such distinction. To the contrary, all areas of life are intertwined, and holiness derives from halachically, meaning according to the law of the Torah, correct business dealings, no less than piety no less than from piety in matters of ritual. The sages teach that one who wishes to be a chassid, which means a devoutly pious person, should be scrupulous in matters of civil and Torah law, as mentioned in the Talmud, in the tractate of Baba Kama, page 30a. For in Judaism, the concept of the temple is in the courtroom as well as in the synagogue. This is the significance of the juxtaposition of chapters. From the proximity, the sages derived that the seat of the Sanhedrin, the 71-member court, that's the Sanhedrin, that is the supreme authority on halachic matters, meaning Jewish and Torah law, should be on the Temple Mount, near the temple itself. For both the temple and the Sanhedrin are expressions of holiness and worship of God. A judge who rules correctly is considered a partner in creation, and one who rules corruptly is a destroyer of God's world. It is quite natural, therefore, that immediately after carrying us through the recognition of God's power, through the miracles of splitting of the sea and the revelation at Mount Sinai, the Torah commences with laws that seem almost mundane in character. They are not in the least mundane. They are as much expressions of God's greatness as the first commandment, which proclaims God's existence and sovereignty. This point is graphically illustrated by the first group of laws in the Sidra, that of the Jewish bondservants. Even the most degraded men and women are created in image of God, and their treatment is as carefully regulated by the Torah as the procedure of the temple service on Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day of the year. The Ramban, Nachmanides, comments that the civil law is an extension of the 10th commandment, which forbids covetousness. In order to know what he may not covet, one must know the rights and property of others. Elaborating on this concept, the Sforno comments that the above commandment states that one may not covet anything that belongs to his fellow. So the Torah now goes on to begin defining what is that belongs to others. So the first part is avoiding damage to others. The Talmud teaches that one who wishes to become a religiously devout person should be careful regarding the laws of damages, as stated in the Talmud in the tractate of Bava Kama, page 30, side A. This forcefully refutes the common misconception that religion is confined to ritual and temple. One who is negligent with someone else's property is as irreligious as someone who is negligent in the laws of Shabbat and kashrut, which means things that are allowed to eat and utensils that one is allowed to eat from or use in their observance. The above dictum of the sages shows that the Torah embraces all areas of life and that holiness is indivisible. Indeed, justice in monetary affairs is a prerequisite to Israel's national security. As the prophet Isaiah says, after warning of impending catastrophe and exile, Zion will be redeemed through justice, and its captives through righteousness, as mentioned in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 27. Begin. And these are the ordinances that you shall place before them. That was verse 1, and on verse 1 already there is a commentary that's important. And these are the ordinances, meaning laws. The conjunction in and the word and, when the Torah begins this Torah portion with the word and, it indicates that there is a connection between this chapter and the previous one, which describes the Ten Commandments, as we ended last week's Torah portion with and the altar. Just as those commandments were given at Sinai, so were these. And the Sanhedrin and the temple must be located near one another, as noted above, which we read before. That you shall place before them. Moses was commanded to teach not only the laws, but their underlying principles and reasoning, so that the people would understand them fully and be able to apply them properly as situations arise. The laws must be placed before them in their fullness, like a table that is set and ready for a meal. Disputes must be brought before them, meaning before Jewish judges, who will rule according to the laws of the Torah. For Jews to bring their cases before a Gentile court, even if their laws are the same in a particular instance, is a desecration of God's name, because it is tantamount to a public declaration that their system of justice is superior to that of the Torah. Okay, we continue to read in the verses. If you buy a Jewish bondsman, which means a Jewish or Hebrew slave, he shall work for 6 years, and in the seventh he shall go free for no charge. If he shall arrive by himself, he shall leave by himself. If he is the husband of a woman, his wife shall leave with him. If his master will give him a woman, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall belong to her master, and he shall go out by himself. But if the bondsman, meaning the slave, shall say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I shall not go free, then his master shall bring him to the court, and he shall bring him to the door or to the doorpost, and his master shall bore through his ear with the awl, meaning to pierce his ear, and he shall serve him forever. Okay, this is very deep, and there's a lot of commentary about this. Jewish slave or bondsman. On the surface, it seems strange that the Torah's civil laws should begin with the laws of servitude. The Ramban, Nachmanides, explains that the freedom of these servants after 6 years is a reminder of Israel's own freedom from Egyptian slavery. This is why Jeremiah, in Hebrew Yirmiyahu, in the chapter of the Haftarah, places such importance on the freedom of bondsmen after 6 years and warns that the punishment for Israel's refusal to set them free would be national exile. One might add that this helps make us aware that our respect for another's person and property should be heightened by the realization that our own freedom and right to property is a divine gift, something that is ours only because HaShem removed us from an all-embracing slavery. Furthermore, the fact that a bondsman or a slave goes free in the 7th year is a reminder of the 7th day of creation, which recalls that HaShem is the creator that created the universe in 6 days and rested on the 7th day. Just as a Jew must have the mental attitude that all of his work is done when the Sabbath arrives, even though his desk or workbench may be piled high. The master of bondsmen, of slaves, we'll just say slaves from now on, frees him in the 7th year without charging him for his freedom. Even though the purchase represented a major investment, the purchase is valid for 6 years only, just as the work week is for 6 days. By the way, the 7th year is a cycle of 7th year, which means in Israel it's counted since they entered into the land. The counter started actually. So every 7th year is a Shemitah year, and since around 3,500 years ago, when the Jews entered the land, they started counting. That counting cycle, I can say, is still today. So still today we have the Shemitah year, and we know which is the Shemitah year, and later on we'll see the Jubilee year, which is on the 50th year, every 50th year. 7 times 7 is 49. So after that 7th year, 7th time, there's another year which is the 50th year, and even a slave, we'll read later on, that said that he wants to stay by his master forever, goes free on the 50th year. The point is that if a slave became a slave on the 5th year or the 4th year or the 6th year, it doesn't matter. Even if he was only by his master for 1 or 2 years, when the year of the Shemitah, the 7th year arrives, of the cycle, the Shemitah year arrives, he goes free. So it's not necessarily 6 years of servitude from the day he starts his slavery, so to speak. It's actually the countdown begins until the 7th year of the Shemitah, which is on the national level of the Shemitah of the Sabbath year that's in the country. And it's applicable only to within the boundaries of Israel, by the way. Okay. We'll read more about that later on, though. The first words of the passage imply that if a Jew has the choice of buying a Jewish slave or a Gentile slave, he should prefer to and should purchase the Jew, even though it would be more economical for him to hire a Gentile slave. If a fellow Jew is in such financial distress that he must sell his services, his brethren are morally obligated to help him, according to the Orach Chaim. If you buy, as it says in verse 2, if you buy a person, there are 2 ways in which a Jew can become a slave. He can sell himself as an escape from extreme poverty, or there may be a circumstance where he may be a thief who is sold by the court to raise funds to pay his victims back. This passage refers only to the latter case, meaning a thief. Okay, if he came in by himself, meaning unmarried. Okay, this is very detailed, but um, basically, if he comes in unmarried, and we'll just read it inside. The next verse's provision that the slave's master may have him live with a non-Jewish maidservant applies only if the bondman was married. But if he was single by himself, when he entered his servitude, he remains by himself, and the master may not impose a maidservant upon him. And this is only allowed while he's in the time of his slavery. He's allowed to be with that maidservant and give children, so that the owner of the slave may benefit from the children of the maidservant, so that they will be future servants to him. But that's the only instance that a Jewish person is allowed to be with a non-Jewish woman in a marital relationship, if you can say it like that. And then as soon as he finishes his slavery, he has to leave them behind. He cannot leave with them, as we read before. There are more details, but we'll move forward. His wife shall leave with him. The verse refers to a Jewish wife to whom the bondman was married before he began his servitude. This is not to imply that she was enslaved or in any other way obligated to her husband's master. Rather, since the slave's family would be without a breadwinner during his 6 years, the Torah shows them mercy by requiring the master to support them. It is this condition of dependency upon the master that she and her children leave at the end of her husband's servitude. So basically, in those times, being a Jewish slave was actually not as what the world pictures and knows what slaves to be. It's actually much different in Judaism. For example, the owner of the house had to make sure that the slave was eating exactly what he was eating, and if there was not enough food for everyone, he would have to give it to his portion to the slave. If he had, if there was, and same goes for like a sleeping arrangement. If he had a nice comfortable bed, he had to give the slave exactly the same type of bed to sleep on. If there was only one bed, he would have to give that to the slave, like the more comfortable one. If there was only one pillow, he would have to give that pillow to the slave. So basically, and if he had like if the slave had a profession, let's say he was a carpenter or a welder, then he would have to give work to the slave, not to go pick in the field, for example, but to give him work in his talented field of expertise. Basically, so anything that would seem degrading, it would not be allowed at all. So in many instances, it would be that the slave would be more better off than the actual owner of the slave. So that's just what I learned in the past from this parasha as well. Okay, let's go forward. Verse 7, if a man will sell his daughter as a bondswoman, she shall not leave like the leave-taking of the slaves. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who should have designated her for himself, meaning to marry her, he shall assist in her redemption if he chose not to marry her in the end. He shall not have the power to sell her to a strange man, for he had betrayed her. Because he took her originally for him to be for him a wife, but then he decided not to. If he designated her for his son, he shall deal with her according to the rights of the young woman. If he shall take another in addition to her, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, or her marital relationship. If he does not perform these three, that's by the way um, the three fundamental conditions when a Jewish person marries a Jewish woman, um, to provide those are the fundamental basic needs of a woman that he has to provide. If he does not, and it's in the ketubah when they get married, the marriage contract. If he does not perform these three for her, she shall leave for free. She shall leave free of charge without payment. Until a girl reaches puberty, the Torah gives her father the right to sell her. Obviously, this is not nowadays. This is in the times of the temple that was to sell her as a bondwoman. But as the passage itself and the teachings of the sages make clear, this right is given him for her benefit. He is permitted to sell her because the sale is expected to result in her marriage to either her master or his son. In fact, if neither of the two marries her, the Torah regards it as a betrayal of the girl, as we mentioned in verse 8. If one of them chooses to marry her, the purchase price received by the father will constitute the betrothal money, by means of which she will become consecrated to either of them, as mentioned in the Talmud in Tractate of Kiddushin, page 18, side B. Equivalent to the ring that is currently used to effect the betrothal. The ring has to be worth, or actually, it doesn't have to be a ring. It can be any object that is worth more than the smallest amount of coin, like 10 cents or 1 cent. Peruta. Peruta means like 1 cent. But it has to be at least has that value. So, and then the woman agrees that that's enough for her. For every woman, it's a different amount, and so on. In this case, it's what the amount that the father decides. Ordinarily, a father should not exercise his right of betrothal while his daughter is still a child, as mentioned in the Talmud in the Tractate of Kiddushin, 41, side A. But in the case of this passage, he may do so because it is an opportunity to provide her future that would otherwise not be available. The girl goes free, according to Rab Hirsch. The girl goes free without payment in one of the three ways. A, at the end of 6 years, as we mentioned the sabbatical year. B, upon the advent of the Jubilee year, means the 50th year, as we mentioned earlier. And C, when her puberty begins, meaning 12 years old. When it says in verse 8, if they didn't want her, then they not to sell her to a strange man, meaning the literal translation means a strange nation, meaning the sages interpret the prohibition to refer to both the father and the master, meaning the slave owner, which is her owner, which was sold by her father. So either the father or the slave owner are not allowed to do this, meaning neither has the right to sell her to someone after they have betrayed her by the initial sale that did not result in marriage. Rashi explains. The literal meaning of the verse is equally valid. It is never permitted to betray a Jewish girl by selling her to a foreign nation, Rabbi Bachya explains. The next part of the Sidra starts on verse 12. When one who strikes a man so that he dies. He shall surely be put to death. But for one who had not lain in ambush, and God had caused it to come to his hand, meaning by accident, it shall provide you a place to which he shall flee. If a man shall act intentionally against his fellow to murder him with guile, from my altar shall you take him to die, meaning premeditated murder. One who strikes his father or mother shall surely be put to death. One who kidnaps a man and sells him, and he was found to have been in his power, shall he surely put to death. One who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. If men quarrel and one strikes his fellow with a stone or with a fist, and he does not die, but falls into bed, if he gets up and goes about outside under his own power, the one who struck is absolved. Only for his lost time shall he pay, and he shall provide for healing. If a man shall strike his slave or his maidservant with a rod, and he shall die under his hand, he shall surely be avenged. But if he will survive for a day or two, he shall not be avenged, for he is his property. If men shall fight, and they collide with a pregnant woman, and she miscarries, but there will be no fatality, he shall surely be punished as the husband of the woman shall cause to be assessed against him, and he shall pay it by order of judges. But if there shall be a fatality, then you shall award life for a life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and a hand for a hand, a foot for a foot, a burn for a burn, a wound for a wound, and a bruise for a bruise. If a man shall strike the eye of his slave or the eye of his maidservant and destroy it, he shall set him free in return for his eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his slave or the tooth of his maidservant, he shall set them free in return for his tooth. Murder incurs the death penalty, but only if it is premeditated. In that case, it is forbidden to spare the murderer. Even if he is just, we talked before about in the Torah, you will rarely find the concept of prison. There's no such thing, really. There was only 2 instances that people got locked up, but that was only in the meantime to find out what to do with them, till Moses got the message from HaShem what to do with people. But it's either the death penalty, and in which way, or a resolve that's usually with enslavement, or like we read now, like the Jewish slave, or a payment, something of retribution to pay back for what was done. In that case, it is forbidden to spare the murderer, even if he is a distinguished person whose services are needed by the nation, even if he is a Kohen, meaning a priest, and is about to perform the service on the altar. He must be removed to suffer his penalty. However, if someone killed through carelessness, but unintentionally, for example, he had not lain in ambush, he is not deserving of death. Though his crime should be punished, for such an offender the penalty is exile in specially designated cities. The nature of the crime that incurs exile, the other related laws are found in Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter 35, and Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 19. In describing the case of an accidental homicide, the Torah says that HaShem caused it to come to his hand. It is a fundamental principle of the Torah that events are not haphazard. Always there is the guiding hand of God. Sudden, coincidental happenings only seem to be so. When someone is struck by the tragedy of having unintentionally killed a fellow human being, surely a traumatic experience, he should realize that since Hashem had caused it, it indicates that he must have committed some sin or crime that went unpunished, and that his current victim must have been guilty of a capital offense that went undetected. By causing one person to cause the other's death, HaShem was squaring the accounts. For God's justice is unimpeachable. It is only who are incapable of comprehending it. It is only we, meaning it is only we who are incapable of comprehending it. The Torah continues in verse 15, one who strikes his father or mother. One who strikes his parents is liable to the death penalty if he caused a bruise. This is in contrast to an ordinary assault, for which the perpetrator would pay damages, if any, regardless of whether he caused the bruise or not. Verse 16, it just shows the importance of respect towards a father and mother, as we discussed last week when we just covered it when it was included in the Ten Commandments. One who kidnaps a man, in verse 16, citing a parallel verse in Deuteronomy, chapter 24, verse 7. Rashi comments that kidnappers are liable to the death penalty only if they forced the victim to work for them and then sold them into slavery. And then when it goes on to mention that he was found to have been in his power, it means the verse cannot mean that the victim is physically under the control of his kidnapper, because, as noted above, he had already been sold as a slave. Rashi explains, therefore, that there must be witness to all parts of the crime. When he was in the criminal's power, both the kidnapping and the sale, and presumably compelling the victim to work. Circumstantial evidence or confession to any part of the crime are not acceptable. To show how seriously, Rabbi Bachya clarifies, to show how seriously the Torah regards this sin, it is placed between the two sins of striking and cursing parents. Similarly, in the Ten Commandments, kidnapping, you shall not steal, as mentioned earlier in chapter 20, verse 13, is placed between the sins of adultery and bearing false witness. Verse 17, shall surely put to death. This is for one who strikes or curses his parents. The sages derive that the manner of death, the death penalty, is stoning, which is more serious than the penalty of strangulation that is imposed upon one who strikes his parents. Okay, so the one that curses his parents is stoning, and the one who strikes his parents is strangulation, meaning like hanging. The reason for the harsher punishment is because a stronger deterrent is needed to prevent cursing, since it can come so easily when one loses his temper. Alternatively, since a curse is punishable by death, must include the use of God's name. One who curses his parents has combined a violation of their honor with contempt for God. Verse 18 and 19, if men quarreled, the Torah discusses a case where a person struck his fellow a blow powerful enough to kill him, even if it was only with his fist, which is not ordinarily lethal. If the victim was so badly injured that there is a reasonable chance that he may die, the court jails the aggressor pending the victim's recovery, because if there is a fatality, the attacker may be liable to the death penalty. This is another instance of when he will be in a holding cell, but that's just until further circumstances determined what will happen with the victim. Once the victim is able to go out under his own power and the court concludes that his life is no longer in danger, even if he needs a cane or a crutch, the attacker is freed from the confinement. If the victim is in his weakened condition should die because he failed to take proper precautions and to heal himself better, in a proper manner, it is not a capital case. That's according to the Ramban, Nachmanides, and Rabbi Bachya. The Ramban is acronym actually of Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. Verse 19. Lost time and healing. When it says lost time and healing, the attacker is responsible to pay for the victim's loss of earnings and for his medical expenses. However, the payment for medical care must go directly to cover the expenses. If the victim prefers to keep the money and forego the necessary care, the attacker need not pay. But it means if someone was injured and couldn't go to work for a certain amount of time, the whole time that he should have been at work, he would have made a certain amount every day. That or a job that he had, a project that he lost, the person that um, that damaged him, that hit him, the attacker has to pay for all those lost days of work, also for the doctor bills and medicine and so on. Verse 20-21, the Torah goes on to talk about killing of a slave. Since the slave of this passage is called his master's property, can only be a non-Jewish slave. Even though the master beat his slave with a rod, which he normally uses to enforce discipline, he is liable to the death penalty if he beats him so viciously that he kills him. However, if the slave lives for at least a full 24-hour period, there is no death penalty because the master had a right to impose discipline, and it is assumed that he did not intend to kill a valuable property. Indeed, the Rambam Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, rules that if the master struck his slave with a rock or some other potentially lethal weapon, one that is not normally used for chastisement, he would be liable to the death penalty even if the slave lingered on for a year before he died of the blow, because such an assault goes beyond any reasonable means of imposing discipline. 22-25, the commentaries explain on bodily injury, the penalty for bodily injuries. This brief passage deals with three issues. A, the penalty for causing a miscarriage. B, whether there is a death penalty for someone who intended to kill one person but unwillingly killed someone else. And C, the penalty for an eye for an eye, which has been the cause of so many ignorant attacks on Judaism, was mentioned in verse 24 and 25. Jump to the commentary for an eye. In case where there was no fatality, but the woman suffered injuries that the assailant must pay damages to her, which are computed as explained above in verse 22, as we read before. It is clear from the Talmud in the Tractate of Baba Kama, page 83, side B, and page 84, side A, and the Mechilta, that this term was always known to mean, as the oral law of the Torah explains it, that the responsible party must pay the monetary value for an eye in restitution for the eye that he blinded. Never was there a Jewish court that ever blinded or otherwise inflicted a physical injury in revenge or retribution. The only corporal punishments ever imposed are death penalty and lashes. Were provided by the Torah. The question that remains, however, is why the Torah expressed this monetary punishment in terms that could be taken literally to mean that Jewish courts routinely mutilated people. The Rambam and other commentators explain that in the heavenly scales, the perpetrator deserves to lose his own eye, and for this reason cannot find atonement for his sin merely by making the required monetary payments. He must also beg his victims for forgiveness, but the human courts have no authority to do more than require the responsible party to make monetary restitution. See also Leviticus chapter 24, verse 17 and 22. So basically, what's the value of a organ or a limb? So basically, if the person was a builder and he uses his hands to, to build structures, then what would be the value of his damaged um, hand or eye that he needed to use to gain that money? For example, if he got hurt at the age of 40 and it's a permanent damage that he cannot use his hand anymore. So from the age of 40, let's say till the age of 70, he would be working, for example. So for 30 years, the value of his job that he lost due to his inability to work at that job. But it differentiates from different people to different people. For example, the price of a construction builder that uses his hands to build and the price of a hand that belongs to a surgeon is different. The value is exceptionally higher for a surgeon. So again, it applies the same concept of if the surgeon was planning to retire, for example, at the age of 70 or 75, so we take the time from when he got injured until the time where he was going to retire and calculate how much on average he would make per year, and that's how much the total penalty will be according to the amount of years left until his retirement, more or less. But that's how it's valued in general. And God forbid not to cut off someone else's arm because he damaged or someone else's arm. It's not as we read in the commentators, it's not to be taken literally. In some extreme religions, if I may say, like the extreme Muslim religion, they take it very, very literally. And that's the problem. When someone doesn't have the oral Torah to go by, they misunderstand and misappropriate what the Torah is explaining. So in some places they actually take a hand for a hand and an eye for an eye and so on, which is a very big mistake, literal mistake. The Torah continues on to in verse 25, a burn. This verse involves injuries that do not decrease the value of the victim. There is no damage, only pain. By including such instances among the list that require payment, the Torah indicates that an assailant must make restitution for inflicting pain. Up to now, we have 4 types of payment for bodily harm: loss of value, pain, medical costs, and loss of income. There is a 5th payment as well, humiliation, which the sages derive from the verse in Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 11, which means if someone was humiliated, he also needs to get retribution and basically paid as one of the titles and of that fall under damage to a person. In order to verse 26 and 27 about striking the slaves, in order to deter the owners of non-Jewish slaves from mistreating them, the Torah provides that a slave may go free in such treatment results in the permanent loss of an organ. The Ibn Ezra explains. Torah continues death by animals in verse 28. If an ox shall gore a man or a woman, and he shall die, the ox shall surely be stoned, its flesh may not be eaten, and the owner of the ox shall be innocent. But if it was an ox that gores habitually from yesterday and the day before yesterday, and its owners have not been warned, and its owners had been warned, but did not guard it, and it killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and even its owner shall die. When an atonement payment shall be assessed against him, he shall pay as a redemption for his life whatever be assessed against him, whether it gores a boy or it gores a girl, in accordance with his judgment shall be done to him. If the ox shall gore a slave or a maidservant, 30 silver shekels shall be given to his master, and the ox shall be stoned. If a man shall uncover a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit and not cover it, and an ox or a donkey fall into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution. He shall return money to its owner, and the carcass shall be his. Meaning the dead animal goes to the person who dug the pit, because he had to pay for the dead animal to the owner of the animal. So he then by that payment he also takes ownership of the carcass of the animal. If one man's ox shall strike his fellow's ox which dies, they shall sell the living ox and divide its money, and the carcass too shall they divide. But if it becomes known that it was an ox that had gored habitually from yesterday and before yesterday, but its owner did not guard it, he shall surely pay an ox in place of the ox, and the carcass shall be his. Let's read some of the commentary on that as well. Death caused by animal. Verse 28 to verse 32. We finished in verse 36, but we'll read this as well. After having discussed the laws of people who kill or inflict damage upon other human beings, the Torah goes on to the laws of animals that kill people and the consequences to their owners if they were negligent. Generally speaking, there are two broad categories of animal damage: when it causes harm intentionally, and when the damage results from its normal activities without any intent on its part. For a domestic animal to go berserk and attack someone or something is uncommon, not the sort of activity that its owner could have expected. Since such a behavior is highly unusual, the owner is not expected to be vigilant against it. His responsibility increases if the animal's dangerous nature becomes confirmed. Although, meaning like a normal behavior. He's always like that. Although a man killing beast is always put to death, how its owner is treated depends on whether or not he had been warned about its proclivity to kill. Our passage deals with an animal that kills a person. Later passages deal with bodily injury and property damage. So basically, to summarize it, it's when the Torah says from yesterday and from the day before, it means two times. The owner of the ox is warned twice. The first time and the second time can be considered accidental, but the third time is already intentional, and then the owner and the animal need to die. The atonement payment in verse 30, if there are witnesses, the court is required to impose a fine upon him, which when paid, frees him from the heavenly death penalty. And it may not be eaten. Once the court has imposed the death penalty on the ox may not be eaten, even if it was ritually slaughtered, like in the kosher way. Moreover, the owner is forbidden to benefit from it in any other way, even like selling the fur or the skin or the horns or whatever, cannot in any way not to benefit from it. What ox that gores habitually, an ox that gored 3 times on different days and whose owner had been warned, which we mentioned before, after each occurrence by witnesses in court, is confirmed a menace, and its owner must guard it more stringently, according to the Talmud in Tractate Bava Kama, page 23b and 24a. Consequently, if it gets loose and kills, he is at fault, and he shall die by the hand of God. This is not a court-imposed penalty. Like all the heavenly imposed penalties, God judges the individual in the light of all the circumstances. If indeed the owner was not culpable, his punishment will be lessened or eliminated accordingly. So then when we read atonement payment, if there are witnesses, the court is required to impose a fine upon him, which when paid, frees him from the heavenly death penalty. The difference between the heavenly death penalty and the court death penalty is that even though the person deserves the heavenly death penalty, the court doesn't carry it out. That's the difference between the heavenly death penalty and the court death penalty. When a person is charged with a court death penalty, the court actually executes him. Here they leave it up to God in the heavenly death penalty, and in a different way, HaShem will organize that this person will die, unless he pays an atonement payment, which can clarify this charge from heaven against the person. When the Torah says a boy or a girl, it is no excuse that their parents should have protected them from harm. And when it says a slave, in verse 32, if a victim was a non-Jewish slave, the Torah imposes a uniform fine, regardless of the sex monetary value of the slave. The ox, nevertheless, is stoned because it killed a human being. The Torah forbids people to leave a dangerous, in verse 33 and 34. Yes, we read that. The Torah forbids people to leave a dangerous condition in a public place, whether it is an open pit or a slippery banana peel. This applies whether the responsible party has created the danger by digging a pit, for example, or by uncovering someone else's previously dug pit that was covered properly, but they uncovered it and left it uncovered. Furthermore, legal ownership is not a factor, since no one owns a public thoroughfare, but one is responsible if he created such a potential menace there, and if an animal falls into it, and the carcass shall be his. Although, in verse 34, although the animal died because of one responsible for the pit, he died because of the one responsible for the pit, the carcass remains the property of its original owner. The owner of the pit pays the difference between the value of the live animal and that of the carcass, according to Rashi. Thus, the Ramban says if the carcass is stolen or goes down in value as time goes by, its owner is not reimbursed for the additional loss. An animal damaging property, in verse 35 and verse 36, it is unusual for an animal to cause intentional damage. Consequently, as noted above, once it has become established that the animal is aggressive, the owner's responsibility to guard it grows, and so does his liability for payment. As explained by the sages, the basic rule emerges from this passage is that the owner pays half of the damage of the first 3 incidents. For the first 3 incidents. After it has been established that the animal is habitually destructive, he is fully responsible for all damages. The sages differ on the nature of the half payment. And according to one view, it is a fine. Theoretically, the owner should not pay because the animal's attack was unexpected, but the Torah requires him to pay half as an inducement to be vigilant. The other view is that he should be held completely responsible, But the Torah forgives half of the payment because he could not have anticipated the animal's aggressive behavior. Torah continues in verse 37, if a man shall steal an ox or a sheep or a goat and slaughter it or sell it, he shall pay 5 cattle in place of the ox and 4 sheep in place of the sheep. One who steals livestock, the Torah decrees that one who steals an ox or sheep and sells or slaughters it must pay 5 times the value of the ox and 4 times the value in place of the sheep. Thus, in addition to the value of the stolen animal, the thief pays a fine 4 times the value of an ox and 3 times that of a sheep. The sages in the Talmud, in the tractate of Baba Kama, page 79b, explain the difference between these two species. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says that the Torah reduced the payment for a sheep specifically because the thief suffered the embarrassment of carrying it on his shoulders as he made his escape. If the embarrassment of even a compassionless thief evokes God's pity, how much more so should we be concerned with the feelings of innocent people? Rav Meir says that the theft of an ox is more serious because it causes its owner the loss of productive labor in his field. This teaches the importance that the Torah attaches to honest labor. Chapter 22, verse 1. If the thief is discovered while tunneling in and he is struck and dies, there is no blood guilt on his account. If the sun shone upon him, there is blood guilt on his account. He shall make restitution. If he has nothing, he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft shall be found in his possession, whether a live ox or a donkey or sheep or goat, he shall pay double. If a man permits livestock to devour a field or vineyard, whether he set loose his livestock or he gazed it in another's field, meaning he took his cattle to someone else's field. From the best of his field and the best of his vineyard shall he pay. If a fire shall go forth and find thorns, and the stack of grain or standing crop or a field is consumed, the one who kindled the fire shall make restitution. Verses 1 and 2 teach that when necessary one may kill to save his own life, but may not kill if only his property is at risk. The Torah illustrates that this law through the case of a thief who is caught tunneling into a home, breaking into a home. Since it is obvious that a householder will fight to protect his property, it may be assumed that the thief is ready to overpower him and kill, if need be. Consequently, the householder may act on the principle that if someone comes to kill you, you need to act first and kill him, according to the Torah. If the householder kills his presumed pursuer, therefore he is not guilty of homicide, since he is considered to have killed in self-defense. The verse explains this concept by stating that there is no blood guilt for killing the burglar. It is as if he had no blood, for he had already forfeited his life. As mentioned in the Talmud, in Tractate of Sanhedrin, page 72, side A. Rashi brings. Meaning, no blood guilt means that the family of the thief doesn't have the right to demand vengeance, to kill the person, and that person, the householder, the owner of the house that was in the house when the thief broke in, doesn't have to flee or run away to one of those cities of refuge, Ir Miklat, in order to save his life, to save his life, as other accidental killings, because he acted in self-defense. Because a thief that's coming into a house is also prepared that if there will be an encounter, he will most probably be prepared to kill the people that's inside it, so that not to get caught or to leave with what he wants, and so on. so that the homeowners have the right to defend themselves in any means necessary. Verse 2, if the sun shone, according to Rashi, the term is allegorical. If it is as clear as that the intruder means no physical harm, as it is clear that the shining sun brings healing to the world, then it is forbidden for the householder to kill. An example of such clarity is the case of a father burglarizing his son, for one may be certain that a parent will not murder his child. Onkelos, that provides translation of the Torah in Aramaic. By the way, Onkelos he was the descendant of Titus, the Roman. Onkelos was also sent to the land of Israel to fight and so on, but he, in the end, to make a long story short, he converted to Judaism, and every batch of soldiers that his uncle sent to collect Onkelos, in the end, after they tried to convince him to come with them, just from his behavior and his answers why he didn't want to go. Those Roman soldiers, also converted into Judaism. In the end, his uncle gave up and stopped sending soldiers to collect Onkelos to bring him back to Rome. So Onkelos became one of the greatest Torah scholars as well of his time, and he provided a complete translation of the Torah into Aramaic, which is in almost every Jewish Orthodox Torah book, Chumash. Onkelos, however, renders that witnesses observed the thief. Accordingly, the reference to a shining sun suggests figuratively that the event occurred during the day, when there were witnesses who saw the burglar, the Ramban clarified. Under such circumstances, he would not dare kill the householder because he would surely be apprehended. Consequently, it is forbidden to kill him in that circumstance. He shall make restitution. The double expression, literally, the literal translation of the actual words is make restitution, shall he make restitution. That's how it says it in the verse. Indicates that in addition to paying for the theft, the thief must pay as well for any damage he may have caused, like a broken window or a broken door or any items that got knocked over and got damaged in the house while he was doing what he was doing, or even to the things that he stole before he got caught, if they got damaged in the process. He shall be sold for his theft. When the Torah explains or states that if he cannot pay for what he stole, the expression his theft indicates that only a man, but not a woman, may be sold to raise the funds to pay his victim. This law is in contrast to the earlier one in chapter 21, verse 37, which taught the special penalty for selling or slaughtering an ox or sheep. The general rule of thieves, as taught here and below later on in chapter 22, verse 8, is that they are fined an amount equal to the value of the stolen property, whether it was an animal or any other movable item. From the word alive, the sages derive that it is the thief's responsibility to return the victim the full value of the stolen item as it was when it was stolen. If it died or merely suffered a noticeable physical deterioration, the thief keeps the stolen item because it is not considered to be the same animal that he stole. In that case, the thief pays its original value plus the fine. which is double. Verse 4, damage is caused by livestock. Rashi explains that his verse discusses damage caused by livestock as indicated by the root Ba'al Bet Ein Resh, which appears 3 times and which is as in Numbers Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 20, verse 4, refers to domestic animals. This one brief verse contains several major principles of liability for damage. It includes 2 separate categories of damage, both of which the animal has no intention to cause harm. They are shen, literally a tooth, which refers to what an animal eats, and by extension, any damage caused by an act it does for pleasure, such as rubbing against the wall and topping it in the process. And regel, literally foot, which refers to damage that is caused in the course of walking or any other normal activity. Since the verse specifies that the damage occurred in someone else's property, the sages derive that an owner is not responsible if such damage occurred in a public area, where the animal has a right to be and behave in its normal manner. See the 2nd chapter of Bava Kama, the tractate of Talmud. When the Torah mentions the best of his field, if the responsible party chooses to pay with land, he must give the best of his land. Fire, in verse 5, when it mentions the damages of fire, one is responsible to tend his fire. Even if he set it permissibly in his own field, hence he must pay for damages if it gets out of control. In addition to crops being destroyed, the verse speaks of a field, implying the land itself being consumed. The case is that the flames swept across a newly plowed field, drying and hardening the earth, so that it must be plowed again. If so, the one who set the fire must pay for the new expense. The next part of the Torah explains and goes into laws of people who are entrusted to safeguard someone else's property, meaning to be a guard. If the charge is stolen, the pikadon, the surety, or damaged, the liability of the custodian varies according to whether he was compensated for the task. Meaning, an unpaid custodian, an unpaid guard, is responsible only if he was negligent. A paid custodian is expected to be more vigilant and therefore has more liability. If he asks his neighbor for a favor to take a look at his lawnmower that's just on the grass, next to his property, he said sure, but then he went inside for a while and forgot completely about the lawnmower. That's called negligence. So that he would be held accountable. But if he told his neighbor, can you keep an eye on the lawnmower, and when I come back from the shop, I'll bring you, I don't know, a cool drink or something like that, or I'll give you payment, literally. Then he automatically turns into a paid custodian, a guard, and his responsibility grows. He is responsible for loss or theft, unless the occurrence was beyond his control and can be regarded as accidental. Therefore, if they claim that the loss was one of which they are not liable, and they have no witnesses to substantiate their claim, they are required to come to the court and swear that their claim is true. They also must swear that they had not used the item for themselves and that it is indeed not in their possession. Both of the above custodians are forbidden to make personal use of the charge. Charge meaning the item. If they had made such unauthorized use without permission, meaning they would be considered thieves and liable in all cases as thieves, even accidental ones. A borrower, someone who is borrowing something, however, is responsible for every manner of loss, unless it occurred in the course of his normal, not abusive use. For example, a hammer cracked while driving a nail, or an ox died during normal plowing. Nachmanides Ramban explains that in such a case, it is the owner who is at fault, for he is the one who authorized its use for those purposes. If the item could not stand a rigorous or ordinary usage, the owner should have not made it available, because the owner knows the condition of the animal or the item. So if it's something that has a lot of wear and tear and is already like in a sensitive state, that if someone is using it without taking these conditions into consideration, then obviously those things can break, or the animal can die. So it's the owner's fault that he even lent it out to begin with. For the law of the renter, see below verse 14, is as in all cases for monetary arrangements. However, the parties have the right to agree in advance that their responsibilities will be either more or less than the Torah stipulates. So if he was a renter, the renter is the last of the four custodians. By saying it came in return for his rental, the Torah indicates, if a man shall give money or vessels to his fellow to safeguard, and it is stolen from the house of the man, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, then the householder shall approach the court that he had not laid his hands upon his fellow's property. For every item of liability, whether an ox, a donkey, a sheep, or a garment, regarding any lost item about which he says, this is it, to the court shall come both their claims. Whomever the court finds guilty shall pay double to his fellow. If a man shall give his fellow a donkey or an ox or a sheep or any animal to safeguard, and it died or was broken or was looted, meaning stolen, without an eyewitness, an oath of HaShem shall be between them both, that he himself did not lay his hand or that he did not lay his hand upon the property of his fellow. The owner shall accept it, meaning the vow, and he shall not pay. If it shall be stolen from him, he shall pay to its owner. If it shall be torn to death, he shall produce a witness. For a torn animal, he does not pay. If a man shall borrow from his fellow, and it shall become broken or shall die, provided its owner is not with him, he shall surely make restitution. If its owner is with him, he shall not make restitution. If he was a renter, it came in return for his rental. A renter is the last of the four custodians. By saying it came in return for his rental, the Torah indicates why his liability is less than that of a borrower, even though both benefit from the use of someone else's property. A borrower derives all the benefits at no cost, while the renter pays for his use. However, the verse does not specify the extent of a renter's responsibility. According to Rameir, he has the same liability as an unpaid custodian, which means a guard that guarded something for free, so that he pays only if he was negligent. The law follows Rabbi Yehuda, that holds that a renter has the status of a paid custodian, a guard that gets paid to guard something, who is responsible unless the loss was beyond his control. The Torah goes on to the subject of, from the instant here it says here, the Torah goes from instances of property theft to theft of the heart. If a man seduces a girl below the age of 12 and a half, he should marry her, but he is not required to do so. Both the girl and her father have the right to refuse the marriage, as mentioned in the Talmud in Ketubot, page 39, side B. If the marriage is vetoed by any of the three parties, the seducer is required to pay a fine to the girl's father. In addition to the fine, he must pay for monetary damage and the humiliation he inflicted upon her. Obviously, this was this is talking about a girl who is before the age of her puberty. That is before the age of, as we mentioned before, her own. She's not responsible for her own life. Her parents are responsible for her until the age of 12. You're saying 12 and a half. There's still a time difference, a 6 month difference between the age of 12 and 12 and a half, because she's still becoming allowed basically for marriage. Basically, since from the age of 12 and a half and upward, it used to be in the times of the olden days until the times of the Second Temple that it was acceptable to marry after that age, but obviously marital relations and so on happened later on, more towards the age of between 15 and 16. This is what we just mentioned the commentary, but we'll read the verse. If a man shall seduce a virgin who was not betrothed and lie with her, he shall provide her with a marriage contract as his wife. If her father refuses to give her to him, he shall weigh out silver according to the marriage contract of the virgins. Okay, I just want to extend on what we said earlier. Who was not betrothed. The monetary punishment of this passage can apply only if a betrothal had not taken place. This betrothal, kiddushin in Hebrew, is a familiar nowadays as the first portion of the marriage, which means, in simple terms, it's called engagement. Nowadays, we kind of do everything in the same ceremony, the engagement and the marriage, but it used to be that the engagement was separate from the marriage. When the groom presents his bride with the ring, again, the betrothal, kiddushin, is familiar nowadays as the first portion of the marriage ceremony, when the groom presents his bride with the ring. But in ancient times, kiddushin was performed many months before, months before the marriage ceremony, even like around a year. Following kiddushin, that's why there is a law in the Torah that God forbids us from being with the engaged women, which means in this relative to this passage where a girl was betrothed, meaning her father has set her aside for a certain boy, and come to an agreement with the other boy's father that these two will be married in such and such time. So it comes into effect when the boy's father or the boy himself gives a ring or the value of the ring in money to the girl's father, being that she's before the age of 12 and a half. If she's after the age of 12 and a half, the ring or the value of the ring can be given to her directly. That's basically the difference, because from that age and onward, she's responsible for herself, and it must be done obviously according to the Torah with two witnesses, kosher witnesses. Although a couple may not live together yet, they are considered to be married to the extent that adultery is a capital offense, and the rule is that no monetary payments are addressed where a capital offense is involved. That's what we just mentioned, that we are not allowed to be with engaged women. That's considered to be married. He shall provide a marriage contract. If he marries her, meaning the Torah says he already laid with her. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's actually talking about actual rape. he shall provide her a marriage contract. If he marries her, he must provide her with the same marriage contract that every husband gives his wife. The Ramban renders he should send her gifts as a groom customarily sends his bride. According to either interpretation, the Torah informs us that the seducer must treat her as respectfully as every husband must treat his bride. He shall weigh out silver. The marriage does not take place. If the marriage does not take place, the seducer is fined. The sages derive that the amount of the fine is 50 silver shekels, which equals to 200 zuz, the amount stipulated in the marriage contract of the virgins. The Torah says seduces. Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe she agreed, but she didn't know what she was doing.